It finally happened. The WGA negotiating committee and the studios have reached a tentative agreement to actually end the writer strike, not the actor strike. Not the actors are now a separate thing. Studios now have to turn their attention to the actors. I believe this will be a domino that falls fairly quickly. Then again, I even made a video about this. I was really convinced when both strikes started, that the actor strike would get fixed first, that the actor strike would be settled first. That didn't work out. The studios have been focused on getting the writers done, and it got done. And that is the topic of today's Mint Mobile hotline question of the day. Listen, guys, if you have a topic you'd like to hear us address on the show, go ahead and call it in anytime, 24/7, and hear your voice on our show by calling the hotline at 951-268-4259. Leave your message on our Mint Mobile hotline. We pick one or two out every day to address, and this one, again, is about the settlement of the WGA and studio strike. Check it out.
Yo, John and crew, the strike is over. So happy to wake up to the news. I am still very tired, so I'm going to go back to sleep and get a good night's rest. But just want to hear your thoughts on the tentative strike being over and what you think the tentative means as far as do they have to work out more details while they have this temporary deal placed. Thanks. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks a lot for calling that in. And yeah, listen, we said last week that we were expecting a deal done anytime. It became obvious that a deal was imminent when they started meeting 2 days in a row, then 3 days in a row, then 4 days in a row. Like it became clear they were getting ready to put a deal. And then it really became obvious over the weekend when the studio heads left the negotiations, but the lawyers stayed. And we all said, well, that means they came to terms. Now the lawyers are working out the language. And we knew Yom Kippur was coming, which is a big deal in Hollywood, and that they were going to try to get a deal announced before the end of Sunday. And sure enough, last night, a deal got announced. Now, to address the first question there, because I want to talk about who came out as the winner, who came out as the loser, and all this kind of stuff, and that'll become more clear. But to address your one thing about, are there still some issues? Why are they calling this a tentative agreement? Well, here's why it's being called a tentative agreement. While the negotiators have come to an agreement with the studios in principle, there's a couple things that need to happen. Now, I'm going to oversimplify this, admittedly, but there are two key things that got to happen here now. All right. The leadership of the WGA East and the leadership of the WGA West, they now have to get this agreement that the negotiators got, and those two executive bodies have to approve it. But then it's still not over. So not only does the executives of the WGA East and the WGA West both have to approve the deal, once that's approved, it then has to go to the entire 11,500 members of the WGA to vote on it, to ratify it. So it's not that they're still working out details. They've got their principal agreement done. It's just got to go through the approval process now. And the nice thing here is why this is going to be a foregone conclusion is that, as far as I understand, the WGA doesn't need a big majority to ratify it. They only need 50% plus one. And I can guarantee you the approval is going to be over 95% because the writers have been itching to get back to work, as have the studios, as has everybody. So the reason they're calling it a tentative thing is because it's not official until the executives and then the membership as a whole ratify the deal. Then it's permanent, then it's in place. The nice thing, though, is that with this tentative deal in place, you're going to start hearing in the next 48 hours that probably showrunners are going to be told you can start staffing your rooms again, even before ratification happens, because I think everybody knows this is just a technicality, a procedural thing they're going to have to go through. They're not expecting any bumps along the way. So, and just like that Office story came out, now that people in the industry know that a deal has been reached, even before ratification, you're going to hear lips loosen up. So now you got people talking about the fact that we got an office. I'm going to tell you what, in the next couple of days, starting today with the office, and I think it's going to be over the next 5, 6, 7 days, you're going to hear a lot of stories come out because people are going to loosen up their lips, feeling a little bit more comfortable about talking about things going on that couldn't be talked about under the strike. Now, who won, who lost, who gave up the most, and all this kind of stuff. Matt Bellani who is now today has the most respected newsletter out there for the entertainment industry called Puck. It kind of came out of nowhere. It's really established itself, and he's an industry veteran. They put out this thing, and I want to read an excerpt from what he wrote out last night at like 1 a.m. about this whole situation, and it's really quite interesting. So listen to this. According to sources in and around the final negotiations, no voices were raised and nobody stormed out of the room during the final stretch. But the studios made it clear that if there wasn't a deal by the end of Sunday, and preferably before the Yom Kippur sundown, they were planning to move on to SAG-AFTRA. So basically, it's like the studio's like, look, if we don't get a deal with you done by the end of Sunday, we're not negotiating with you anymore. We're going to move on and look at our other problem, which is SAG-AFTRA. We're going to go focus on them. And then you're going to have to deal with whatever template we set up with them. So the WGA was frustrated too. The studios were frustrated anyway, but it became important. The in-person meetings of the past week gave way to Zoom meetings yesterday and today. The studio side complained that the guild didn't know how to close, that they kept coming back with more and more and more. The guild complained that they hit a wall on Thursday when the studios outright said they wouldn't negotiate on a couple of favorite issues. Both sides, under incredible pressure from their constituencies after a 146-day strike, recognized that the deadline was today or potentially weeks from now. And I want to tell you, I believe the early reports. If they didn't get a deal done this weekend, I don't think we would have seen the WGA strike end until 2024.
Yep.
Now, there was a little bit of controversy that the studios let it be known publicly. I think it was Friday. The word came out that they gave their last best final offer. The studios made up, we have made, this is it. This is as far as we're willing to go. Some people, that probably wasn't the smartest thing to do because some people in the WGA got their backs up about it. Now it looked like if they agreed to it that they were capitulating because more people were afraid about saving face than saving the industry, apparently. But that almost derailed things. But I guess it was good enough. I guess the deal was good enough. So that brings us on to the question about who won. And I like the way Matt puts it. He said this. So who won? Well, that's impossible to tell tonight. But the spin has already started. The guild is saying things like exceptional and meaningful gains language, though it hasn't quite elevated to the framing of historic yet. And while the studios are saying nothing, last thing they want is to disrupt an unpapered deal. It's clear that the top negotiators, Disney's Bob Iger, NBC Universal's Don Langley, Netflix's Ted Sarandos, and Warner Brothers Discovery's David Zaslav felt a sense of urgency, a sense that arguably they should have felt months ago. So, look, right from the beginning, we said this is going to end when everybody walks away a little bit unhappy. Everybody's going to have to understand that neither side is going to get everything they want. You're going to have to give up on some things. And I am thrilled. I am. I'm thrilled that this deal has gotten done. We're going to get things developing again. I think this week you're going to see showrunners start staffing their rooms again. I think you're going to see writers getting back on writing their scripts and all that kind of stuff. Again, nothing too official until it's ratified, but that's going to come quickly, I think. Guys, we want to take a second to thank a sponsor of this video, Vessi. Now, like me, I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of Vessi, the shoe that claims to be incredibly comfortable and waterproof on top of that. Well, these claims are really interesting to me because as a Canadian who walked around in a lot of snow, and as somebody who likes to go camping and hiking with his wife on the weekends, there's nothing more uncomfortable and horrible than walking around in wet feet. So after receiving my first pair of Vessis and noticing how incredibly good looking the shoes are and how mind-boggling comfortable and flexible they are, the first thing I did was I took them into the backyard to put it to the supreme waterproof test and dipped my feet in my pool. Guys, my feet were bone dry, and like 20 seconds after having them in the pool and I touched them, the shoes themselves were also bone dry. Guys, seriously, these shoes are stupidly comfortable, they look great, and they absolutely lived up to the claim of being waterproof and keeping my feet dry. I absolutely love my Vessi shoes. So guys, if you want shoes that are good looking, are ridiculously comfortable, and on top of all that waterproof, you need to head to vessi.com/Campea and get yourselves a pair today. Go to vessi.com/Campea and get shoes for your best summer yet. But Rob, I gotta tell you, it also frustrates me. It frustrates me. Because in the 146 days of the strike, and I got plenty of frustration for the frickin' studios and for the WGA. They met in the same room together for a grand total of 9 days. in a 146-day strike, they met in the same room together for a grand total of 9 days. And I was talking to Jonathan before we started, and I said, it's not a coincidence that when they sat in the room for 5 days straight, which was more than all the previous 140 days that they had sat in the same room together, it's not surprising that, oh, you mean when we actually sit in a room committed to getting a deal done for 5 days straight, we got a deal done? Quel surprise. How shocking. Why the fuck didn't you guys do this in week 1?
Or before the strike started.
Or, one of my biggest pieces of frustration, Rob, is you know why the DGA didn't go on strike? Because I was talking to a DGA member, says, because we've been talking with them behind the scenes for over a year before the deadline. Whereas SAG and the WGA didn't start talking to them till within about 2 weeks of the deadline. Why not before the strike had happened? And why did it take you 146 days to sit in the same room? Oh, and by the way, studios and WGA, clearly you both gave up some things. Why not just come into the room and actually plainly, John, you don't understand, John. You don't understand the art of the deal. Fuck that. Be plain. Just go in and say, look, here's what's important to us. Here's some things that are kind of important to us we'd like to have if we can figure out a way to compromise, but we're not willing to die on this hill. Because at the end of the day, the WGA had to go in there and say, there are certain things that the WGA said at the beginning, we won't surrender this, that they surrendered on. And there are things that the studio said at the beginning, we won't surrender this, and they surrender. Just come, sit down together, start negotiating. And it pisses me off that they went months without talking to each other. Because guess what? You know what I learned in negotiations, Rob? If there's an issue you can't budge on, and an issue that the other side can't budge on, you know what? Negotiate the other stuff anyway. Because quite often when you negotiate on the other points, that solutions start to present themselves. But if you're not in the same fucking room together and looking at each other across the table and dialoguing it out, no solutions present themselves. So 2 things I want to point out. It's not a coincidence that they got the deal done when they actually sat in the same room for 5 days straight. Also, why the hell wasn't Bob Iger, Dave Zaslav, Ted Sandros, why weren't they in the room earlier? Because that's when shit got real, is when the actual studio heads got involved and not just their reps. Anyway, super thrilled that a deal got done. I think when we get the full details coming out, I honestly think we're all going to look at it and go, that kind of makes sense, which makes me wonder why some of the smartest people in the world couldn't have come to this in the 3rd week, or like you said, Rob, before it. Anyway, I'm happy. I know it doesn't sound like I'm happy, but I am happy. Rob, clearly the studios and the WGA were both coming under heavy pressure from their individual constituencies. A deal got done. What do you think about what we're hearing so far? How good is this good news that it's there? And then how quickly do you think maybe they're going to be able to get the actor strike settled too?
Well, I'm really curious to see what deals they made, because there's real concerns when it comes to the future of all creative arts and how AI, is going to affect writing. You have people like George R.R. Martin have brought a lawsuit against OpenAI, the company that's behind ChatGPT and Midjourney and all this. It's going to be very interesting to see how the WGA has protected themselves moving forward. I always think that these deals are made always behind the 8 ball when they're not thinking 10 years ahead. And I understand they have to think, well, we've only can think 3 years ahead. And I'm like, no, it's a future that's going to be very different than the present we live in today. But I'm curious to see that. I'm glad they did this now, because the whole business is changing. The world is changing. Look at the stock prices of Disney, Warner Brothers, Paramount. They need their core businesses to be running. Amazon, Apple are different, but it's nice to see the industry moving forward, that people are going back to work, and we're going to get what we love so we can talk about movies and movie news and all of our favorite things in the world. I'm just happy to see this moving forward. I'm curious to see what they've done. And John, what they've done here is going to affect what SAG does as well.
Yeah, on certain issues.
On certain issues. But I mean, in terms of labor, look, we always want, I think the really important thing is when it comes to the United States, labor has always been a force to be reckoned with, and people who work hard need to be compensated and be able to live well. And, the last thing in the world corporations want to do is pay for labor.
One quick point. because you mentioned AI is a big thing in ChatGPT. It was reported today, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, Amazon is spending $4 billion on a direct competitor to ChatGPT. The same people who were in the room for this writer's strike. So I'm very curious about the timing of
Well,
that.
I mean, nobody disagrees that the future of things like ChatGPT, Google has a version called Bard.
And many other applications in writing.
Microsoft has a version of it as well. I mean, that is going to be a big thing for online stuff moving forward. Amazon being a tech giant as well. They're going to be into that. Now, we got some details. I'm not going to bring this up on screen, but I'll read this through. So more details will come this week, but we've confirmed from sources that the lead negotiators for the WGA achieved broad protections against AI, which is one of the issues I was 100% on the WGA side. That is some protections from AI is 100% something they had to get, and it sounds like they were able to get that. Though the studios kept certain rights to experiment, determining that contract language was actually what stretched in the final negotiations on Sunday. The writers also got certain levels of minimum staffing based on the number of episodes of a TV show. That was a tricky one, because what do you do with like some of the best shows on TV, like Taylor Sheridan's, where he writes them by himself? Is he going to be forced to hire 8 or 9 writers? But apparently they were able to make some progress on that, so that sounds good. Though they didn't get the guaranteed level or numbers that the WGA wanted. Again, it's compromise. You're going to get some of what you want. You're not going to get everything what you want. They didn't get a strike recognition clause, though, which would have allowed the WGA to respect other unions' picket lines. So the WGA was wanting to get a clause put in that said, hey, let's say IATSE goes on strike. We want the right to not go to work and respect their strike. And it's like, no, like we're making a deal with you. You honor the deal we make. Otherwise, we're going to find clauses for, hey, we know everything's fine, but we don't want to pay you because somebody else isn't paying somebody else. So that was never going to happen. So they didn't get that. And on the all-important transparency issue, it's still unclear how significant gains there were. We had heard, Rob, that, the writers don't get any information about numbers and analytics on streaming platforms. We heard in that one offer that the studios made public that they would quarterly give reports to certain reps, but they still wanted to maintain the privacy of their stuff. So it sounded like they made a little bit of progress on that. The new residual scheme contemplates bonuses based on consumption. The more a title is watched, the higher the residual. Again, I don't know if that's the one they actually ended up on. That's what they were asking for. And that's a big deal. But what the bonuses benchmarks are and how much access the guild will have to data is not clear. They're going to follow up on the issue. So it sounds like exactly the way negotiation should go. Both sides got some of the things they wanted. Both sides didn't get everything they wanted. And hopefully they got a working deal. Is there any point in here that stands out to you as like maybe being, the Excalibur and the stone, like the main thing? Like, what do you think maybe the final hurdle they had to get over was? Do you think it was AI? Do you think it was residuals? Do you think it was writers in the contract?
I think it's a combination of things. I think the fact that I think what the Writers Guild really wants overall is the opportunity, if this sounds strange to say, but to do their best work. You want to be able to have enough people to pull off making the shows you want to make, and you want the writers involved. Like, you had writers I have friends that are TV writers. If their show was shooting in Canada when their episode shot, they would go and watch their episode being filmed. And if they needed to weigh in on that, they could. And all of those things were being taken away. And I think that ultimately what you want is the quality of the product to be as good as it can be, because that's what all that remains is the final version. And if they're not being given the time, and they're not being given the tools, and they're not being given the talent they need to create something that's worth creating, I think that's a problem, because that's the only way you get another job, is to make sure that the work that you're doing is great work. And you want to get paid, but at the end of the day, no one becomes a writer or goes into the arts just because they want to get rich. They want to create great work because
I know I think it's both and. I think they want to create great work and they want to get rich.
But the only way you can get rich is if your work is great and you have a track record. So what's happening is everyone's work is being undermined, and that prevents them from getting rich because they don't get the jobs they deserve.
This is funny because that's why, there are like issues of residuals and stuff like that. I've kind of not agreed with the WGA.
That's a different issue.
The reason I've agreed with the WGA on most of the other things is because ultimately I think if the studios would look at what the WGA was asking for, and I've said this many times, soberly, they would see that what the WGA is asking for is actually going to be good for the studios
Yes.
too, right? And it sounds like those key things were things they made progress on. Again, I'm sure details are going to come out more over the coming days, and we'll see. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure you like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget, we have a daily podcast called the John Campea Show podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app of choice. Go and subscribe to it today so it'll be there when you need it.